Supreme Court proves that it's not just in Trump's pocket. Of course, the slopstream media has been trying for well over a year to paint the current Supreme Court as Trump's rubber stamp. The problem with this is that it is simply not true. I'm going to give you my breakdown analysis from the last couple of weeks, where the current Supreme Court term ended with a bang. The big one being, of course, birthright citizenship. Before we dive in, I want to thank all of our longtime listeners and everyone joining us for the first time. Your support is what keeps Saving America growing. If you enjoy real analysis that goes beyond the headlines, please like, comment, and subscribe on your favorite platform. And if you come across a story the slopstream media is ignoring, as they often do, send it to me at drdavesavesamerica.com. I read every message that comes in. I'm Dr. David D. Schein, and you're listening to Saving America. Thanks for joining us. The headline grabber is the birthright citizenship case. For those of you that may be unaware due to the slopstream press burying anything that goes against the narrative, the true situation is that pregnant women have been coming here to have babies. Under the 14th Amendment Citizenship Clause, the babies are considered citizens. Recently, as Chief Justice Roberts stated, because they are born in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof under the Constitution, he concluded they are citizens at birth. The abuse of this clause is reported to be in the many thousands. I recall one story that a Chinese billionaire has impregnated a bunch of women and flew them over to the U.S. to have their babies be born as U.S. citizens. These babies are then returned to China, where they can be reindoctrinated by the CCP, all while retaining their U.S. citizenship in their, of course, real home country of China. Later, they would have the right to return, vote, and damage American society, or even worse, engage in terrorist activities. How does this make sense? We know it's happening, but with sanctuary cities and the liberal presidents looking the other way on immigration, how are we as Americans supposed to enforce our laws? From president to president, it's just that important. If you review the presidency since World War II, as I do in my first book, Decline of America, we have alternated between Dem and Republican presidents. If you count years in office instead of individual presidents, it's also very close. Democrat administrations about 49 years, Republican administrations about 44 years. Hey, that's a pretty even playing field. So let me get back to the topic at hand. Trump issued an executive order to stop the practice of this birthright citizenship, or as it's called, anchor babies. The problem is the new court decision says it cannot be fixed that way. I disagree with the decision due to the part of the majority overlooked, subject to the jurisdiction thereof. You see, a minor is under the jurisdiction of their parents, not the country. So if the parents are Chinese, the baby is subject to that jurisdiction, not the USA. In the meantime, I've heard proposals to ban visits by pregnant women into the U.S. Not sure how effective that would be. Getting a constitutional amendment passed right now is certainly not likely. Don't worry, conservative listeners. Trump did score 2 wins in a row on immigration. The really big one was the president's ability to end TPS, or temporary protected status. Think back to over 20 years ago. My gosh, 20 years ago, that's a long time. In 2006, we were still using Razor flip phones, and most of the social media that we now follow did not even exist. Due to a natural disaster in Haiti, about 250,000 of their residents were brought in on this TPS. In addition, a bunch of Syrians were also let in on TPS. Most of these people are still here. When Trump made a logical pronouncement that it was time for them to go home, some Hispanic immigrant agency and others brought a lawsuit to block it. I expect this decision will substantially accelerate the termination of such TPS status for many. After all, temporary means temporary, not 20 plus years. Hey, I don't want to seem like I'm not a compassionate individual, as liberals will run and call conservatives fascist, racist, and every other name in the book. Even though they know that arguments just don't work, they are not based in protecting America. Just imagine if you open your door even to your own family and say, hey, friend, sleep on my couch, eat my food, enjoy my prosperity for 20 years. Well, at what point do you throw your crazy drunk uncle off the couch? No, the USA is one of the most giving nations in the history of the world, but we have already given ourselves right into $39 trillion in national debt. In fact, a famous saying from one of my historical heroes, Ben Franklin, is fish and guests stink after 3 days. Given the Biden administration, illegals flowed over the border like water over a dam. They were all trained to demand asylum. Coming here for our taxpayer-supported freebies does not mean you should get asylum. And the High Court agreed on this one. So, a loss for Trump on birthright, but it wins on ending TPS and also the holding that asylum claims should be properly filed in the U.S. after an immigrant crosses the border legally. Again, the issue is that most asylum claims are bogus. Living in a country that has a lower standard of living than the U.S. does not mean they qualify for asylum. Then, a pair of decisions on the president's authority over federal executive employees. This split 1-1. Trump fired Fed board member Lisa Cook after she was accused of some form of mortgage fraud. As far as I can tell, her mortgage case remains unresolved. However, over $1 million of other people's money has reportedly been spent on her legal fees just to block Trump from firing her. The Supreme Court just held that since she was not fired for cause, Trump could not fire her. You see, she is accused, not convicted in the mortgage fraud situation. So technically, there is not cause to fire her. Keep in mind that the Dems moved to impeach Trump twice for unproven allegations. In the world we live in, where we have all this knowledge at our fingertips, is it not ridiculous, the hypocrisy of the left? On the plus side, the High Court did back Trump on firing executive branch employees. When Trump returned to office in January 2025, he fired 2 Dem appointments to the FTC. That's the Federal Trade Commission, for those of you not used to wading through the alphabet soup of D.C. The 2 individuals went to court to block their firings because a cause was not identified. The defense of the fired executives was very old, the case going back to the administration of FDR. It was called Humphrey's Executor. It established a precedent that cause was required to fire these executives. Well, the Supreme Court dumped that precedent and said that the president was free to fire these executive branch employees. So, Humphrey Dumphrey fell off the wall. Then there were 2 election-related decisions. The GOP and the Dems split 1-1 in a huge blow to election integrity efforts of the Trump administration. The Supreme Court held that the federal election day statutes do not require mail-in ballots to be received by election day in order to be counted. This narrow 5-4 decision shows how tough the call was. The issue is whether ballots supposedly postmarked before election day, but not counted for days later, could still be counted. The court allowed this dangerous practice to continue. On the other hand, there was a challenge to limits on political party contributions to specific campaigns. The GOP challenged this limitation on First Amendment grounds and won. Of course, there's so much money in politics already, I'm not sure this makes much difference. Buried among the big Trump news, there were a few that squeaked by, including a SCOTUS ruling on the use of Google data. I am not convinced the Supreme Court got this right. The issue was whether the police could obtain a suspect's location information from Google without first obtaining a search warrant. The plaintiff argued that doing so violated the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable search and seizures because individuals have a reasonable expectation of privacy in their cell phone location data. Law enforcement took the opposite position, arguing that this information was available through a third party and therefore was not entitled to the same level of constitutional protection. The Supreme Court ultimately sided with the plaintiff, holding that obtaining this location data constituted a Fourth Amendment search that generally would require a warrant. While I strongly support law enforcement, I also recognize that protecting the constitutional rights remains one of the court's most important responsibilities. This is one decision where reasonable minds can disagree. The transgender athlete decision was another major headline brought on by and highlighted by the Trump administration. Two separate cases challenged laws in West Virginia and Idaho that restrict participation in women's sports to biological females. The challengers argued those laws violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, while the states argued they were enforcing the intent of Title IX by protecting competitive fairness and privacy in women's athletics. Title IX, for those that may not know, was enacted to give women in sports a fair chance compared to the dominance of men's sports in schools and universities. The Supreme Court sided with the states. The three liberal female justices dissented, offering a very different interpretation of both the Constitution and federal law. I respectfully disagree with Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson's analysis in particular. It is stunning how many verdicts she gets absolutely wrong. She is proving herself to be nothing more than a DEI hire who is borderline dumb. As both a father and grandfather of girls, I believe protecting fairness, competitive opportunity, and privacy in women's sports is entirely consistent with the original purpose of Title IX. So what do these cases tell us? The court ruled that President Trump on some issues and against him on others. It ruled for conservatives in some cases and liberals in others. Remember, this same court previously ruled against Trump administration on certain tariff issues as well. That hardly sounds like a court that simply rubber-stamped one president or one political party. Whether you agree with every decision or not, the record shows a court willing to decide each case on its own legal merits. That's a far more accurate picture than the claim the Supreme Court is simply in Trump's pocket. I'm going to go in more detail on each Supreme Court decision on my Business Law 101 reports. So look out for those episodes coming soon. Thanks for joining us today on Dr. Dave Saves America. Every week we cut through the headlines, examine what's really happening, and discuss the issues shaping America's future, from the economy and national security to business law and public policy. If you found this discussion valuable, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who cares about the future of our country. Have a story or topic you'd like us to investigate? Leave it in the comments. Your suggestions could become a future episode of Dr. Dave Saves America.